Hi, today we're going to make Ullagami 5x5 building blocks. It's a pop-up model. You can see that it's made out of a single piece of paper. It folds flat, and when it's done, it stands up nice. Looks good. To do this, we need a cutting mat, a piece of white card, the template, which you can download. We need a metal ruler, a fine ballpoint pen, and a scalpel or X-Acto blade. And the last thing we need is a little bit of glue. So step one is to glue the template to the card. Never use your cutting mat as your gluing surface. You'll get glue all over it and it will get sticky and it's not nice. So on the card, I'm putting just the tiniest amount of glue just along the edge. You barely need any at all. It's only temporary. We're going to throw that part away, and it just needs to hold long enough. One glue stick can last a really long time. And now the two things are connected. So if you look at the template for a minute before we begin, there are 4 kinds of lines on it. There are the straight black lines, and we're going to cut those. There are the dash lines, which will be mountain folds that fold toward you. The dotted lines are valley folds that fold away from you, and then the very fine dotted lines along the edges are the spine. That's where the whole piece of paper will eventually fold across the middle, and that is the primary fold that determines all the math for the rest of the model when it was being designed. So, to begin, take the metal ruler and line it up on the first score line, the first dotted line, closest to the glued edge. Always work away from the glued edge. If you work toward the glued edge, the paper can ripple and bunch up, and this way you're smoothing it out as you go along. So, with the ruler lined up, take your ballpoint pen. It should be a fine line ballpoint pen with pretty dry ink, not one of these super wet things, and draw. Just trace the dotted line. You want to press hard enough that it makes a sort of line in the card behind, but not so hard that you tear through the template itself. And methodically, one at a time, anytime there's a dotted or a dashed line, go over them. What we're doing here is we're teaching the card, we're giving it a map of folds that it can follow, so that when it comes time to fold the final model, the paper already has sort of a direction to go. You can do this with an embossing point, which is the traditional tool, but they drag along the paper, and I like the ballpoint pen because the roller ball is a little smoother and it's less likely to tear the paper. So just one line at a time. At this point, you treat the dotted and dashed lines exactly the same. A fold is a fold at this point. And working away from the glued edge of the paper, just line up all the collinear lines in a row with your metal ruler and use the ruler. The ruler will give you nice straight lines. The pen tip should be touching the ruler all the way along, unless you're really good freehand. But the folds in particular need to be straight. Curved folds don't work. Now this is the spine line. So it goes all the way across. You can see that there's this black frame around the outside of the template. That is, we're going to cut that off. We're going to cut around that black edge. So you don't need to go all the way exactly to the edge of the paper. If the tip of the pen gets stuck in the paper, don't drag it through. Just start from the other side of the line and complete the line. Just like we'll do with the scalpel when it comes to that, I try to hold the pen as vertically as possible. You get the cleanest etch in the card that way, and it also keeps it out of your way so that you can actually see what's going on a little bit better. So now we have the model. It's been completely scored. If you look at the back, all the lines where the model will fold are now indented. They're etched a little bit into the surface of the card. And now it's time to do the cut lines. And again, you pick one side, and very methodically, you work your way across the card, cutting every line. If they're collinear, you can line them up. To make a clean cut, position the point of the blade at the beginning of the line and press down. You'll feel a nice thunk as it sinks through the paper and the card beneath it. Drag it smoothly to where you want it to go, and then pull up. You don't need to press super hard, just enough to go through the card. You don't need to carve up your cutting mat underneath it. And when you pull the blade out, just pull it out straight up. You want as little of the blade to enter the paper and the card as possible, because the blade gets fatter as it gets farther away from the tip, and you lose precision the deeper you press. Also, while you're doing this, you can feel the texture of the paper and the texture of the card and the texture of the cutting mat and even the wobbliness of the table all through the handle of the blade. You can be very aware of what you're doing. And then you make fewer mistakes if you feel the resistances and smoothnesses inside the fiber of the card. This model is a relatively simple one, and I like using this one as a starter because it demonstrates a lot of the different skills that the more advanced models have. On this one, there are lots of sets of lines that all line up together. On some of the more advanced models, almost every line is separate. They aren't collinear, and it's a lot trickier to make sure you get them all. But if you move from one side to the other, you should catch them all and not leave any forgotten. The tip of the blade snapped off. Always use a new blade. So when that happens, change blades right away. And have a safe place to keep your old blades. I use a wine cork. So that's all the vertical cuts. Now we need to do the horizontal cuts. So again, never move the piece of paper, never move the template on the cutting mat. Always just move the mat when you can. The less that they slide around relative to each other, the less chance there is that they will accidentally detach. And again, working from the glued edge away, there are a few little horizontal cuts to make. Just follow the ruler down until they emerge from underneath the ruler. And go really slow. The smaller the cut, the slower you should go. You don't want to overshoot it. You can feel when you hit the paper that's already been cut, when you intersect. Okay, and that's the last cut of the model. Always put the cap on your blade when you put it down, every single time. It's just a good habit to be in. Now, before we disconnect them, turn it over and have a good look. Make sure you haven't missed any lines. Make sure that everything looks like it is where it's supposed to be. There's no gaps. There should never be a line or a score that ends without connecting to something else. Okay, so we have everything cut and scored, and now we just remove it from its frame. We're going to cut around the outside now. Do the top, do the vertical ones first, and then the bottom one, and leave the glued edge for last, so that it stays connected as long as we need it to. And now we can remove the frame and the template. And we have our card. Scored, cut, ready to fold. The first thing to do is to make sure that everywhere there are two cuts that intersect, they actually cut through. Sometimes they can cling on with tiny little bits of paper, You want to make sure that all the cuts are clear. Like right here, these two are kind of stuck right there. We go. Then turn it over, and working from the back, gently just push on the model in the gentlest possible way to sort of lift it clear of the card behind it. Just go all around the outside, and you don't have to make any of these creases 90 degrees yet, just to separate the part we're going to be working on from the background, and to give it a little bit of 3D-ness already, almost like a pillow. It sits almost like a pillow now. The next step is to fold the spines, and you can use the template that you started with as a guide if you want to know which folds are mountains and which folds are valleys, but it should quickly become intuitive which are which. And working with one fingertip behind the card, push on the mountain folds and pinch on the other side. Just gently. They don't have to be 90 degrees yet. Again, we're not doing the final folding yet. We're just sort of guiding the paper and teaching it, when we do the final folding, what direction we want each of these creases to go. Paper has a lot of memory. Once you fold it in a certain direction, it will want to fold in that direction again the next time. Now this model is big enough scale that fingertips are no problem, but some of the more complicated models that I've designed, you can use tools as surrogate fingertips to help you do this job. You can use all kinds of things. You can use chopsticks or bone folding tools, embossing points, pointers. Anything can be a paper crafting tool. And now we're at an intermediate stage where each fold has been sort of very gently shown which direction it needs to ultimately go. And we can start to reinforce those now and start to collapse the model. So holding the floor of the model down and lifting the wall of the model up gently, you can push from behind and exaggerate a little bit each of the creases that you've already done, just with gentle pressure. It's easier near the top and the bottom, because that's where it's easier to provide direct force. So then you can go back through, now that they're all a little bit popping out, and reinforce them a little bit more. And now we can do the final crunch. Push forward and collapse that first step. And then the next two will be getting ready in position to collapse on top of that. Likewise with the third layer. We've told the paper where we want it to go. Now we're just doing it with increasing definition. And when you get to the middle, you can turn it over and do the same thing on the other side. And then for the final crunch, you can pick it up and hold it kind of like a sandwich and gently squeeze it shut. This is when you can finalize all the creases that we made, that we scored and then reinforced and then folded. And from the back, you can look at the model and see any of the valley folds that look like they could be a little sharper, and you can give those a little extra crease. And then from flattened state, you can open it up, and there you have it. 5x5 building blocks.